and I'm super excited to have a maybe it's an ex-radio broadcaster on the show, but
Uh-oh.
certainly.
Is that you or me?
I'm what they call, or when I was growing up, we used to call these people a try-hard. So I'm the try-hard.
Okay. All right. I never heard that expression before. That's great.
You're the expert.
Yeah.
Great to have you on the show, Mathew.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the invite. It's good to be here. I'm coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona, where it is currently about 116 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can do the math and figure it out that is very warm.
And that will be blowing the minds of the Australian listeners and anyone in the Southern Hemisphere.
It blows my mind, quite frankly, Anthony. It blows my mind too.
We're experiencing a chill here. They call it that cold spell or chilly. We get the chills off the Antarctica. So
It's so fascinating. I've got to come to your land at some point, man. I've met a few people that work in Australia and New Zealand and just kind of that whole continent over there, and it just fascinates me. I've got to get there.
Yeah, we'd love to have you here. So let us know when you're here, and we can do a live in-person broadcast.
Let's go. I like it.
Awesome, Mathew. Well, let's bring the listeners up to speed with your backstory as to how you have arrived at what you're doing today.
Man, you want the short version, the long version? I'll try to summarize it like this. I think I'm not too dissimilar than a lot of folks are. Post COVID, there were a lot of people who decided to make a real big transition in their life and set down the one thing they used to do and step into something new. And I happen to represent that group of people in some way, shape, or form. Since I was 10 years old, dude, I always tell people when I'm going to get on the stage is I have this record. It's right behind me, in fact, in my drawer. But it's the original 45 that I used to go down into my basement with. And I would pretend to be a radio personality as a 10-year-old. I'd be putting this record on and talking it up and giving away concert tickets and introducing the record and whatnot. And I dreamed that would be my career. And I got into my radio broadcasting career at 19 years old, and I achieved every single dream on my checklist by the time I was 25. Right. And then I went on to have just one of the most incredible careers that a human being can ask for. And I feel so lucky, so blessed. I feel really all of the things toward that career. It just taught me so much about myself and how to interact with people. And there's just so many facets of the radio and television business that they transcend in so many different places. So I don't do that anymore. And, I know that you love a good conversation about mental health. And so that kind of turns the corner for my conversation. And in 2017, I started to feel depression. I just got real anxious, started getting pretty depressed. And then you know what happens next? The body starts to get real achy. And so I developed back problems and ended up, eventually requiring back surgery, which is a whole other story. And then things evened out for a little while. And then the deep end, I just fell into the deep end of the pool and had a couple life events that took place and developed shingles. And then I started to get these panic attacks. They call them nocturnal panic attacks, where they come at you in the middle of the night. You just wake up with your heart pounding out of your chest. And on my third and final panic attack of my life, I was in the emergency room because I thought I was dying of a heart attack. And of course, spoiler alert, I made it. And everything worked out. But it was in that moment where the doctors came into my room and they said, there's nothing wrong with you. They did every test under the sun, Anthony. And I was like, we can't find anything. Sorry, dude. And I was smart enough to know that because it wasn't physical, that it was probably mental or spiritual or both. And so I elected into a spiritual and mental health retreat for 5 days and had my life flipped upside down. And I had so many things happen for me that now are the single reason that I wake up every single day and do my podcast, get on stages, work one-on-one, work in groups. Like it's what I live for now. And that's this idea of the transitional character. And I know we'll get into all that, but that's a little bit of the broadcasting beginning, middle, and end.
Awesome. Well, I want to start with the beginning. So
let's go.
That kid that had the dreams, that was, just wanted to be a broadcaster. Where was the inspiration behind that?
So I grew up in a town called Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we had really good radio stations in Minneapolis. And we had a couple of just extraordinary morning show talent that I really grew a deep appreciation for and a deep bond with. And, thankfully my mom was really into radio. And so she was somebody who used to listen to radio and call in to try to win contests and stuff. And so I got really involved probably because of her.
Yeah. Wow.
Doesn't it always go back to our mom?
Well, no, but yes. So where the question was going was, like, all kids have dreams, right? And they all, they start playing out and, fantasizing and imagining, this all happening and coming true. And some kids get the encouragement to pursue their dreams, and others get their dreams squashed. And I was thinking, you must have been one of those kids that had the support of your mother to follow your dreams, essentially, because you followed what inspired you from such an early age and achieved incredible things at such an early age. And so it was that, I guess, the support and nurturing around you that really enabled you to, well, was the enabler, was it? Or, I mean, obviously there was tenacity that you had yourself.
And more than anything, I loved it. It just that, I did it for me. I always tell everybody, when I was on the air, nothing else mattered. For 5 hours, nothing else mattered. It was just me and my audience and my phones and, now social media and whatnot. But to kind of answer your question, yes, my parents were supportive, and, they didn't get everything right, like a lot of moms and dads, right? But they did get that part right. And they could have been really difficult about it because I was a classically trained string bass player. I used to play the upright bass, and I was decent. I was actually trying out for orchestras in Minnesota, and I thought that I might go to continuing education in the music field and become a symphony musician. So I was enrolled in school. I was studying under this really big deal bass player in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I got invited into this radio studio one night through a series of events that were kind of unfolding in the background. And I mean, Anthony, when I walked into that studio and I saw this guy, Tony Fly, doing his thing, I was like, this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. Like, it was so clear to me. It was as clear to me, also I can put it to you, it was as clear to me at I guess I was 18 years old at the time, as it was to me 4 years ago when I made the decision that I was going to walk away from radio and television and bust into this new career with podcasting and speaking and coaching. Like, it couldn't be more clear that was what I was supposed to do.
And that's like, the next thing is that it really was driven from within you. You weren't told that, you should be doing this, Mathew. This is your career. This is, this is what you're made for. This is what you.
So true.
You get what I mean? Like it, but all the inspiration came from within. In both instances.
That's a great point, right? And a good reminder for us it's like one of the things I've been thinking about in the last couple of years is this idea of, like, when somebody asks me to do something, if it isn't a hell yes, then it's probably a no. Yeah. And even though sometimes you have to say no to people, or you have to put up some boundaries around what you're going to do and not do, I think ultimately it's a better life for yourself, right? You're not stressed out because you're not people pleasing.
100%. And I think that's a challenge today, is because of the endless comparisons we're doing, through social media, and seeing success in the eyes of others and not really connecting with ourselves and who we are and what, success is within. And I think that's where and we're going to lead into this transitional character, is very much your life's been driven from what lights you up from within, as opposed to, trying to chase someone else's dreams or someone else's success.
That's so true, man. Yeah. now it's a singular focus, and really everything boils down to those two words for me now. And it's incredible because the transition happened for me 4 years ago, and it feels as real and alive in me today as it did when I made the switch. And it's one of those things where when you explain it to people, they can feel like, man, that's really heavy. Like, I don't want to be that person. This is not what I signed up for. And, what I really try to impress to people is I think in every way possible, it makes your life easier. It makes your life easier. It's simpler. Yeah. There's no other way to put it. It makes sense of everything that's going on.
So let's talk about this transitional character.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
So first of all, we need to start with a definition from your perspective as to what is a transitional character.
So I guess I want to speak right to the person who's listening to us right now. And, you got little earbuds in and you're diving into this podcast because some of this feels like, I don't know, it might hit me a little bit. If you've ever lived in a world that didn't feel like it fit. So I can remember being 12 years old in my house. And like I said, we had some good things in my house, but we had a whole bunch of bad stuff too. I can remember being 12 years old, looking around my house going, there's no way this is all we're going to do with the rest of our lives. Like, this does not make sense to me. I didn't have any serious role models that were achieving anything incredible. I had just a lot of good blue collared people in my life who, worked in the military or worked at labor jobs or, worked at the grocery store. Like, there was nobody really getting after it in my world. And on top of that, my father was an alcoholic and my mom was, just really, man, she's just kind of mean, not always, but she had a mean streak in her that seemed to come out towards me a lot. And so that was the home that I grew up in. And it felt a little chaotic to me. It felt like it didn't fit. And, there were so many things that were happening within our family's lineage, if you will, that didn't sit well with me. And I just felt like when I get to, this is for anybody who's ever said this, like, when I get to be a parent, I won't do that. Right. It's like, when I get older, I won't do that. Well, that to me, now we're starting to close in on what is a transitional character. I'll define it for you succinctly, which is a transitional character is the person that comes here to end dysfunction for themselves and the people around them. And the easiest way I can explain it is you want to make sure that everybody who comes after you with your same last name does it differently than the people that did it before. And so, next week, for example, I get to go in and I work with prisoners here in Arizona. And it's maybe some of my favorite work that I've ever done in my entire life. And what I really try to do is I try to get these kids and these young men to buy into the idea that they're the transitional character. Like, hey, bud, what if you're the person sent here to end all of this dysfunction and make sure that everybody who comes after you with your last name doesn't have to go through this crap? And so getting in front of people and saying, what's been happening that you want to stop? Everybody's heard that expression before, that problem ran in my family until it ran into me. And so what is the thing that you would like to see end? What dysfunction would you like to see end? And so that's a very long way of answering your very short question, which is, what is a transitional character? I would love to know what you think about when I say that, Anthony.
For me, it's the evolution of self. The constant transformation of self. So it's like, so when you're explaining that transitional character, for me, it's stepping into that growth. So it's when you said, ending ending the dysfunction, for me, it's like, what's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And like, so these people that have these tough upbringings, experience, a tough early life and, end up in crime and whatnot and end up in prison. That's what you're helping them to do, is to end that cycle and to break that and to really come out of that. And in order to do that, we need to aspire to change and be open to something different, which you gather that from an early kid. Like you looked around you and said, okay, I see chaos. I want a bit more order, but you found, like, thriving is right at the border of chaos and order. And so you've seen the disorder, dysfunction, the chaos, and you've been able to mold it into, creating this brilliant self. I mean, it coming out of this, right? Like, it's like, for me, it's like that in that cocoon and the butterfly, coming out. So I'd love you to continue to talk about this transitional character in how you would inspire these prison people to open or get out of their cocoon and
yeah. Well, so like one of the first things we're going to do next week is we're going to just go around and we're going to open up the conversation to the guys. And just the question is, what cycle would you like to break? What would you like to see done differently in your family? And I've been doing this work for about 3 years in the prisons now. And so I know what's coming up. Great. I just hit my mic and I got a little warning, so I wanted to make sure I didn't do anything crazy. They're going to say things like addiction. They're going to say things like abandonment. They're going to say things like incarceration. They're going to say things like murder. They're going to say things like drugs. Okay, those are all really hardcore things. We all can agree that that's tough stuff, right? But what I'm working with them, what I'm going to try to get them to do a little bit is to step into the energy of the transitional character. And this is what I mean by that. If you're going to be the transitional character in your lineage, well, then you better do one really important thing. And that important thing is you better start taking care of yourself. And I mean that in every way, shape, and form. We have a massive uptick of people talking about self-care, right? And that's fine, right? Like, when I'm on stage, the joke that I make is like, sure, wine night with your girlfriends is fine. Going all your bros to tear up some wings and watch fantasy football is good. But what I want you to do is forgive somebody. What I want you to do is have the hardest conversation of your life with the person that that you've been carrying a massive weight towards for a long time. I'm looking for you to do things like make sure you're in the career that you really want to be. Make sure that you're in love with the person that you're with all the time. Like, real self-care, man. Adding humor back into your life. Connection with people. Taking care of yourself. And if I can get these kids to care about themselves, then I believe we have a chance at them showing us that they care about themselves. And so let's apply this to who's listening to us right now. And what are those things that you want to change about your life? What is that? And then, so now what would it look like? If you were to change that, what would it look like? Well, let's just give out, for example, maybe some people have to leave. Maybe there's some inner chaos, to use your term from a few minutes ago, that is contributing to your life not making as much sense. So, like, what people are going to leave? Your circle of friends. What do you need to learn to get back to your talk about growth, right? Like, what do you need to read? Some books? Do you need to fine tune some skills? Do you need to go to the doctor and get some health conditions taken care of because they've been weighing on you, and these little aches and pains are causing tons of stress, which is adding up, and before you know it, you're going to have back surgery like I did. Like, real self-care, taking a long, hard look at yourself and saying, what do I need to go right through today?
Wow. Yeah. You know what I loved about that piece was that in actual fact, when you hit your microphone, you actually changed microphones. And so for me, it was a bit like that. It was a bit like you know how you need to change the tone or something in order to get a message across? You inadvertently did it through changing the microphone. So you might want to switch back to your boombox.
Okay. It's irritating. Sorry about that.
No, that's all good. It's all good. This is what editors are for, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it says you can be all recording, but you can't switch mics. So I can't switch mics while we're recording.
It's a tricky one because you came left and came back in, so I think it has enabled I don't know. We'll find out. It's a technical issue that.
Do we want to stop and come back to it?
Probably just to. But let me have a look, and I can check as to what you have connected. It actually says no microphone. Okay, so
I can see it on my end. It's my little earbuds that are connected. And It's not my microphone.
Yes, that's what it's saying here. JLab Buds Mini. Yeah. Okay. So maybe just go back out of the studio, come back in with the mic.
Okay. Let's see.
I'll keep it open and keep it. Yeah.
I think we did it.
Yeah, you did. We're back.
So sorry about that. I can't believe that.
All good. So maybe we'll go back to the transitional character and the definition of that transitional character and go through that piece again. I think.
Okay.
Okay. Is that good with you?
For sure. Like from the very beginning.
Yes. To I know you engaged the listener and asked them to think about something that they
Should I
wanted
start at
to
the prison? Should I start at the prison and just
Yes,
kind of get
please.
up to? Okay, beautiful.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right. For your editors down in 3, 2. Let me put it to you like this. So next week, I'm going to be going into work with prisoners. I work with inmates. It's one of the greatest things that I've been able to do in the last few years. And I'm going to talk to these guys about what's been happening in their family for generations that they would like to see end. Right? What dysfunction would they like to see gone forever? And I want to engage our listener today to do the same thing. Like, what has been happening in your life that you want to stop? Think about that. And then think about what would it look like if that stopped. Now, I know what these prisoners are going to say because I've been working with them for 3 years, right? And they're going to say things like addiction. They're going to say things like incarceration. They're going to say things like abandonment, divorce. They're going to say words like abuse. Those are heavyweight things. That's a lot for a young person to process and go through that. I know. I was one of them. It was a very difficult thing to grow up in a house where that kind of dysfunction was taking place, because I've said this for years, Anthony. It's like, I believe a lot of people have like two versions of the house they grew up in, right? There's a lot of good things that happen, but there's a lot of bad things that happen too. And as I like to say, nobody's in therapy because they got too many hugs, right? So we're generally dealing with the bad stuff over here. And that's the stuff that we have to kind of rewire and update the operating software on. But in terms of the transitional character, like if you're that person here to end dysfunction for you and everybody else that comes after you with your last name, if you truly believe that you could step into some energy like that, what would be different about your life? How would you do things differently? Who in your life would you eradicate from your life right away because you recognize that, you know, in the back of your head, like they're the ones weighing you down? What circumstances or environments do you put yourself in now that you would stop putting yourself into if you were to really be that person? Because here's the thing, man, I jumped ahead a little bit, but let me just pause and say, if you're the TC, if you're the transitional character, there's nothing more important than you could do for yourself than to take care of yourself. Because now we're counting on you. Now we need you here as long as we can. So now it's your job to really step into a self-care plan and make sure that you're doing the best things for yourself. And, you know, when I talk about self-care, man, I'm not just talking about like fluffy stuff, mani-pedi, spa days, wine night with your girlfriends. But what I'm talking about is forgiveness. I'm talking about having that really difficult conversation with the person that you've been ignoring or blowing off for years and years and years. When people ask you how you're doing and you say, I'm fine, having the conversation that would actually make you good and not fine, right? Stepping into taking care of your health on every single level. And I know that's something you're so passionate about, right? Holistically, as Anthony talks about in all of his podcasts, that's the way to do it. Attack it from the whole thing. And the transitional character is very much that way. There's no one dimension of the transitional character. It's a holistic way of living your life. Whatever is holding you back, you go right through it. You don't go over it. You don't go under it. You don't go around it. You just go right through it. And you have those very difficult conversations with people. You work on an attitude of what could forgiveness look like? You know, I understand that forgiveness is a very challenging thing for people, but maybe you're not at like maybe you can't forgive them yet, but what would it look like if you were to? Whether you love it or not, you're hanging on to this crap, and it is seriously weighing you down. And what I'm in the spirit about, what the transitional character is in the spirit of, and what I hope I can get these kids to do next week is to step into the energy that I'm the person here to end dysfunction. Because, Anthony, how different would they live their life if they were that person?
Absolutely. That would live a life of inspiration and just living authentically, actually. Really, ultimately, that's what they will connect with, is who they truly are and what they want their lives to look like, as opposed to, you know, what's imposed upon them, you know, and what they, I guess, the role models they've seen growing up haven't been, I guess, something that they want to continue. And that's what you're, you know, essentially breaking that cycle, ending that, you know, dysfunction, and allowing them to create the life that they want.
Yeah, and we can plug this into every area of our life. This is what I love about it, right? Like, you can plug this into work. You can plug this into your career. Like, if I'm the transitional character, how am I working out my career? Am I making the right choices? Am I setting myself up for the right success? Am I having the hard conversation with my boss or my coworkers? You know, am I hanging on to some grudge from some beef that took place 5 years ago and it's slowing me down in my progress? Like, the application of the transitional character is in every area of your life. It's in your marriage. It's in the relationship that you have with your kids. What did you see growing up? How did your mom interact with you? And how do you want to make sure now that you interact with your kids? Some people had amazing moms and dads. I'm married to one. My wife had incredible parents who set like literally the gold standard for how it should be done. I grew up in the opposite house, and it's one of those things where I can see the subtle differences in the way that she operates her life versus the way that I operate my life. I have a little bit more anxiety and fear in some decisions that I make. She's a lot freer in the decisions that she makes. And that's just one example of how one little thing can really rewire you completely different.
But the beauty I see in your upbringing is you're able to relate to the people, your audience, because of your experience. So if you had have had that beautiful household like your wife, your audience would be saying, you haven't lived what we've lived through. You get what I mean? Like, how can you relate to me? How can you?
I know. Yeah, it's so true, man. I've said it 1,000 times over the last 4 years, but I believe every single one of us, we must get to the point in our lives where the worst thing that happened to us becomes the best thing that happened to us. And you just have to figure out a path towards that. Once you unlock that piece, it's like insane freedom waiting for people on the other side of that, because you just operate your life completely different. I can see you shaking your head. Yes. So you know about this.
Yeah. 100%. Like it's that blessing in disguise, it's sort of, you're really revealing, and finding, I guess, the meaning. And that's, it requires an open mind to find that meaning, because if you're constantly, as you said before, in that sense of begrudgment, or, wanting to maintain that rage or resentment towards someone,
just blaming the world.
Blaming the world, you're actually never going to find that meaning, the hidden meaning that's wrapped up there, that you've found, you've discovered, and you see it as a blessing now. And so this is something, obviously, you help the prisoners through, is that, that person that you just can't forgive, or you haven't been able to forgive. You need to have that open mindset as to, we can find a way to, to go forward together.
Dude. And listen, I'd like to double down on that, because I know there's a lot of people that hear a phrase like, oh, you just got to let the worst thing that happened to you be the best thing that happened to you. And it sounds so arrogant and pompous to say that, right? And I understand that. And there's a lot of people who, even when I talk to them, they say that thing of like, oh, but you don't know what I dealt with, or you don't know what I saw. And, look, trauma is not a freaking contest, everybody. Like, it's not, this isn't the Olympics and we're trying to see who got hurt the worst. I've done 300 plus podcasts on learn from people who lived it. And I have talked to people who have had everything from grief to rape to incest to abuse to addiction to incarceration. Like, we have literally, there's nothing we haven't talked about on my podcast. And I can tell you unequivocally that we've had 3 or 4 people from every sector on the show. So number one, you're not alone. Other people have gone through these things too. And it doesn't have to happen overnight, but you do have to be committed to the process of it. And more importantly, I think that it's key for all of us to look at the way that the things that have happened before us have wired us for sound, so to speak, right? Like the psychiatrist that's on my show, Dr. David Lycan, is incredible. And he says when we experience things in life, it gets etched in our brain like a vinyl record, right? And so those grooves, they're never going away. And so our job literally becomes to live with the sound of our record. And the good news is that we can write new grooves. We can reprogram. And that's really encouraging. But it's not easy. It takes time. It takes discipline. It takes a real desire to want to do it. And if you ask me, if you're that transitional character, why wouldn't you get to it today? Like, if you're that person, why wouldn't you start taking a really hard look at how things have wired you? And if you like, I'll give you an example of that. But, look at how things have wired you and get curious about how you can change that aspect of your life.
Let's explore that.
Let's go
deeper. Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we'll use an example. And like I said, trauma is not a contest. So let's establish that right now. A lot of us had terrible things happen to us. I wasn't even a kid when this happened. I was 23 years old. So I was a young man, just kind of getting into my radio career. And it was Sunday night, August 26th, 1996. And you probably don't remember a date like that unless some crazy crap went down, right? And so what happened was that evening, my parents were getting ready to meet the woman that I was engaged to at the time. And we were going to have a little barbecue on our deck. And about 5-10 minutes before everybody was scheduled to arrive, my dad went into cardiac arrest. And he was a very young man, only 47 years old. He was in the military, so he wasn't super out of shape, but he didn't take great care of himself either. We can talk about that later. But I tried to save my dad's life, and I'm the one that picked him up out of his chair. I'm the one that laid him down. I'm the one that started pumping on his chest. I'm the one that started giving him CPR. I literally tried everything that I possibly could to save this man's life, and none of it worked. He literally died in my arms. Now, whatever your story is, I'm talking specifically to the person that's listening to us right now. Whatever your thing is that you connected to when I told that story, and you said, yeah, I've got something like that, something similar to that. Now let's go deeper and let's explore how that might have wired you for sound. So in my case, because I was unsuccessful at saving my dad's life, I had a couple of really wonky beliefs set up within me. And one of them was that I wasn't smart enough, or I didn't know enough. Because if I had known more, I could have done a better job of trying to save this man's life. And the other one was that I wasn't useful. Because look, I'm the one that jumped in. I tried to do everything and nothing worked. Now, are either one of those fair, Anthony? No, of course not. It's totally unfair. But it's what happened. And I carried that belief system with me for the next 30 years, for the next 28 years, I carried that belief system with me. And it would show up in my relationships with people where that little voice would be in the background going, you don't know enough, shut up. You don't know enough, don't insert yourself in this situation. And there were times, Anthony, where like I knew full well that I was the smartest one in the room and had the answer for the thing we were talking about, but that little voice was in the back of my head. And then, these other instances where I'd really want something for myself, but I would be like, you're not useful. You don't know enough. And so this is how those beliefs show up for us. And as I love to articulate, like they won't show up all the time, but they show up enough. And they certainly seem to find a way to show up when it actually matters. The beliefs usually come out to play when we're dealing with something that's really important to us. It's not the guy that we say hi to on the street where it's a problem. It's with our spouses and our children and our coworkers and our family members. And so this is what I mean when I say get really curious about the thing that's happened to you, how it's wired you for sound, and then now get really curious about how you could rewrite that story. What could you do to rewrite? What are the next grooves on that record? What do they look like? And to me, that's why I say like the worst thing that happened to you can become the best thing that happens to you, because without that moment in my life, I am not the person I am today.
And I'm really intrigued as to how you rewrote your script, or, I guess those limiting beliefs, how you overwrote them.
Okay. Yeah. So first things first, I've already mentioned the F word a few times on this podcast, forgiveness. I had to do some really important work with a therapist to forgive myself for not being able to take care of my dad the way that I was supposed to. And it's kind of an interesting little anecdote to this story, which is there's a man in my life now who's my cardiologist, and I actually produce his podcast. We met at an event, and after I interviewed him about my dad, he literally looked at me at the end and he said, there's nothing any cardiologist in America could have done for your father. Like he was going to die that day. He had something that they call sudden cardiac death, which means the first time you find out about it is the day you die. And so that in itself was a huge weight off my shoulders. Like this cardiologist is telling me, you did okay, kid, right? You did everything you could. But I really needed to go in and forgive that 23-year-old who was still carrying that shame and that guilt and that story. And so for me, it was inner child therapy. That was one of the, if not the greatest impacts that I've made on my mental health journey. And I believe for almost everybody, there's some event that happened when you were younger that's etched into your vinyl and it's still playing in your head. And today is a great day to get curious about changing it. Today is like the perfect day to, what I like to say is like, make today the last time you did it. Why not? Today's a great day to make the last time you did it.
100%.
Yeah. Let's go to work.
Yeah. So you talk about, and this is like breaking the cycle. So we're now aware that we're in a cycle. We have this limiting belief that we're focused on. What is a step that you recommend to really help someone like to take action today after listening to this episode? What's the next step?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know, how much time do we have? There's a couple of exercises that I think are incredibly powerful. And they're probably another conversation ahead for you and I, right? But so like, what could you do today? Today would be a good day to get curious and start journaling. Today would be a good day to get curious and maybe start to see that therapist that you've been thinking about. But I want to be really careful about one aspect of this. I don't believe that therapy in the traditional talk sense is the best option for everybody. What I've come to learn over the last 4 years and all these podcasts that I've done, it's like, there's a different modality for everybody. Some people need a spiritual healer. Some people need a shaman. Some people need a big ass bag of ayahuasca in Costa Rica and they need to let their mind blow up. Some people need a really good friend that they can just sit down with. Some people need a pastor. Some people need a stranger that they can talk to. Some people need cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's a really effective tool for them. There's a lot to choose from. As I always say, there's never been a better time to heal. So step one today, after you get this podcast done, is like, I want you to literally sit with your hand over your heart and just be quiet and just say, what do I need? And just keep your eyes closed and put your hand over your heart and just say, what do I need? And just keep saying it for 2 minutes if you have to. But let your ego get out of the way when the answer finds you, because you might not like it. Right? Because what you might need is therapy. What you might need is a different relationship. What you might need is to make a career change. What you might need is to get rid of that friend that's been weighing you down for a little while. What you might need is to start eating better, right? And so whatever comes through, let's start there and just build on that, right? Really small, careful steps for the next 90 days to make sure you get there.
Fantastic. And we'll certainly have a part 2 to this recording where we can go further into that journey in terms of breaking the cycle and ending dysfunction. I love it. And I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you. It's been enlightening and entertaining at the same time. That's
good.
Good. It is good. It lighten up the subject matter, which is beautiful. And so thank you. But before we go, Mathew, you mentioned your podcast, and obviously you've interviewed a lot of people that have lived all sorts of experiences, as you shared, and they share their journey to how they broke the cycle and recovered and are now thriving. So please share a little bit more about what you do, your podcast, and how the listeners can best connect with you.
Great. Yeah. I mean, learn from people who lived it. That's what I called the podcast. That came to me in night 3 of my retreat. I was literally sitting with my healer on the Red Rocks in Sedona, Arizona. And I looked at him and I was like, I'm going to quit my job. And I'm going to start a podcast called Learn from People Who Lived It. And he just got this big smile on his face. And he was like, I love it. So we have learned from people who lived it, and we release every single week. There's a full episode that comes out. And then the next week is a little, like what I call it, quick tips, where if, I can only spend 5 minutes with you, here's what I'd want you to know. And so you can start engaging in that, learn from people who lived it wherever you get podcasts. It's also learnfrompeoplewholived.com. And then, I love speaking. I love putting on personal developments and workshops. And I do that all over the country here in the United States. And so you can find me there at mathewblades.com with one T, mathewblades.com.
I learned that when I was Googling you. I was thinking, how come it's not working? And then I went back to your name and it's only one T. So that's the key.
It probably changes the Google results a lot.
Yeah. It does. So Yeah, once again, Mathew, I really appreciate it. Now, to the listeners, I'll include everything that Mathew just shared in the show notes, so you can go directly to the show notes, click on the links, and connect with Mathew and connect with his podcast. And I look forward to having this enlightening conversation and entertaining conversation on part 2 of this series with Mathew Blades.
Hey, listen, before you go, I just need to say, people like you are just so critically important to what's happening, especially as I see it in this transitional character energy. Because if you're going to be a TC, then you need to plug into people who are really giving a crap about this kind of subject matter. And so the fact that you're even investing energy and doing this podcast for you and for the people that you serve, and it's just extraordinary. And so I hope that your audience really understands how important Anthony is to not just what's happening for him and his listeners, but for the collective, right? You never know what little ripple somebody's getting out of 5 minutes with you and I, or some of your former guests. And so I just didn't want to end this podcast without saying thank you, because we need more people like you and I out here doing this.
And that's a great cue to the listener to share it with others that could benefit.
There it is.
From it. Yeah. So thank you, Mathew. I won't say any more. You've summed it up so well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.